So what comes to mind when you think of marriage? Is it, a white dress, maybe a big party, or perhaps just that piece of paper?
Yeah, for a lot of us, our picture of marriage is really shaped by what we see day to day.
Exactly. But what if I told you that across different cultures and looking back through history, this really fundamental human thing has taken on this incredible, sometimes really mind-bending variety of forms and functions?
That's absolutely right. This deep dive is all about pulling back the curtain on marriage, not just the version we might be familiar with, but its amazing diversity.
Hmm.
We've sifted through a whole stack of sources, anthropological studies, philosophical takes to give you a really comprehensive picture, and hopefully some of those aha moments.
Right.
Our mission here is really to explore how humans, well, how they pair up and build families, and what those different ways reveal about societies, both past and present.
So get ready to understand not just what marriage is, but maybe why it is the way it is in different places, and what that tells us about, well, human ingenuity and how we adapt. Let's unpack this.
Sounds good.
Okay, so when we talk about the basic sort of fundamental forms of marriage, two big categories jump out immediately: monogamy and polygamy.
Yep.
Monogamy, of course, that's having one spouse at a time. Seems pretty straightforward, but our sources suggest there are actually layers even within that.
Right. Exactly. For instance, what you often see in, say, Western capitalist societies is something called serial monogamy.
Okay.
This is where people might have several partners over their lifetime, but crucially, they commit to only one person at a time.
So like marriage, divorce, remarriage, that kind of pattern.
Precisely. And it sort of challenges our traditional idea of happily ever after in an interesting way.
Yeah.
It highlights this idea of ultimate commitment to one person, even if that person changes over time.
And then there's the other side, non-serial monogamy. This sounds less about a series of personal choices and more about maybe societal structures.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Our sources point to places like India where, historically anyway, remarriages were much less common, sometimes even legally tricky.
Oh, okay.
The legal complexities, the economic costs of ending one marriage could make people really hesitant to start another. And back in ancient and medieval India, you had strong cultural prohibitions, like against widow remarriage. That also played a big role. It really shows how deep these social norms can run.
It's interesting how some early theories tried to paint monogamy as somehow more evolved or civilized.
Absolutely, those evolutionist ideas.
Mm.
But our sources really push back against that completely.
Right.
The prevalence of monogamy, it seems, isn't about some kind of linear progress towards being civilized. It's about very practical, real-world factors.
So what kind of factors are we talking about? What actually drives whether a society tends towards monogamy or not?
Well, things like demography, just the basic numbers, how many available partners are there in the population,
Uh-huh.
or economy and wealth distribution. Can people actually afford multiple partners? A very wealthy person might be able to, where others simply can't.
Makes sense.
And then, of course, you have legal factors and social norms. Think about how in some Islamic societies, religious norms permit multiple wives, while in others, laws strictly enforce having only one spouse. All these things shape the marital landscape.
Okay, so that's monogamy. Now let's flip to the other side. Polygamy. That's having multiple spouses at the same time. And this also breaks down, right?
It does, into two main types.
First up is polygyny. That's where a man has multiple wives simultaneously.
Correct. And even within polygyny, there are distinctions. You have sororal polygyny, where the co-wives are actually sisters.
Oh, interesting. Like the king of Bhutan, wasn't that an example?
Exactly. His wives are sisters.
Yeah.
And then you have non-sororal polygyny, where the co-wives aren't related, like the kings of Brunei and Thailand, for instance.
So the big question here is why?
Yeah.
Why is polygyny relatively common in certain societies? What are the driving factors behind it?
Well, anthropological research, looking at studies from Africa to places like Nigeria, gives us some really fascinating insights. For one thing, some studies suggest polygyny isn't just about what men prefer. It can actually offer some surprising economic and political advantages.
Really? Like what?
Well, it often leads to a larger family size. More people means more hands for labor, potentially more resources, which can boost a family's economic position.
Okay, I can see that.
And in some communities, having a larger family, especially with more sons, can also give you higher political status.
And are there social benefits too? I think I read something about that.
Yes, absolutely. Some research highlights how in polygynous setups, co-wives often share the workload, childcare, household chores, and this can actually give women more free time, more leisure.
Huh. That really makes you question our own sort of individualistic assumptions about responsibility within a relationship, doesn't it?
It definitely does. And here's a really unexpected twist. Sometimes there's a dietary connection.
The dietary connection to polygyny. How does that work?
It's pretty amazing. A study of the Hausa people in Nigeria linked polygyny to severe protein shortages in their environment.
Okay.
In these communities, children often suffered from malnutrition, specifically a condition called kwashiorkor, that's severe protein deficiency.
Right, I've heard of that.
So, to give a child the best chance of survival, mothers needed to breastfeed for a very long time. This led to a postpartum sex taboo.
Meaning no sex after childbirth for a while.
For quite a while, yeah, sometimes 3 or 4 years. The belief was that intercourse would harm lactation.
Wow. Okay, so women couldn't have sex for years.
Right. But men still have biological needs. So the societal adaptation that emerged was polygyny. Men would take other wives to satisfy those needs, while one wife was focused on nursing an infant.
That's an incredible chain of cause and effect. Poor nutrition leads to long lactation, leads to a sex taboo, which then leads to polygyny.
Amazing. It really is. Demographics also play a role. If a society has a surplus of women, maybe because of warfare killing off men, polygyny can be seen as a way to, well, distribute those extra women among the available men.
And there's a theory about a virtual surplus, too.
Yeah, Melvin Ember's idea. It suggests that if men tend to marry later in life than women do, it effectively creates a bigger pool of marriageable women for men to choose from at any given time, even if the overall sex ratio is balanced.
Interesting. And of course, there's the economy.
Always. Even where polygyny is culturally allowed, like in some Islamic societies, not everyone can actually practice it. It takes significant wealth to support multiple wives and larger families.
So wealth inequality plays a big part. Only the rich can really afford it.
Exactly. What all this diversity within polygyny shows us, I think, is that marriage forms are often less about morality or progress and much more about pragmatic, often ingenious solutions to real-world challenges, resource scarcity, population imbalances, even basic nutrition.
Okay, so that's polygyny. Now, what about the other type of polygamy?
Yeah.
Polyandry, where one woman has multiple husbands. You mentioned this is much rarer.
Much, much rarer, yeah.
Yeah.
Cross-cultural surveys found it in only a tiny fraction of communities worldwide. Why do you think that might be? Why is polyandry so much less common than polygyny?
That's a good question. Maybe something to do with resource control, or maybe female numbers.
You're hitting on the key reasons our sources suggest. One major factor is a severe shortage of females. Sometimes this was tragically due to practices like female infanticide, as reported in the Marcations culture.
Right, so if there aren't enough women, men might have to share.
Exactly. The other big reason is about limited resources, especially land, and the need for land preservation.
Ah, okay. How does that work?
Studies of places like the Tibetan Plateau or the Khasas in India illustrate this really well. Imagine you have very limited fertile land. If you have, say, 3 sons, and each son marries separately and has children, that land gets divided and subdivided over generations.
Until it's too small to support anyone.
Precisely. But if those 3 brothers share one wife, the land stays intact within the family unit. It doesn't get fragmented. It's a fascinating economic adaptation to scarcity.
Wow. So these forms of marriage, they're really deeply tied to the specific circumstances of a society. Okay, we've looked at the forms monogamy, polygyny, polyandry, and some of the surprising reasons behind them. But what about the rules? The rules for who can marry whom? Every society seems to have its own set of, well, laws of engagement.
They absolutely do. We can generally group these rules into endogamy and exogamy, and it's important to remember these aren't mutually exclusive. They often operate together at different levels within a society.
Okay, so endogamy, that's marrying within your own group,
Yeah.
right? Like your caste, religion, language group.
Exactly. And the reasons for this are pretty clear. It helps maintain group unity, solidarity, it preserves cultural or religious traditions.
Because sometimes practical skills too, like keeping trade secrets in the family.
Yeah, preventing the leakage of occupational skills. Think about goldsmiths in the past wanting to keep their craft within their own kin group. And of course, sometimes it's about maintaining perceived purity of blood or social hierarchy, things like blue blood marriages among European nobility, or ancient Hawaiian chiefs marrying their eldest siblings to keep the lineage pure.
Okay. Then the flip side is exogamy, which means marrying outside a particular group.
Right, but often within the larger endogamous group. So, for example, you might have caste endogamy, you must marry within your caste, but then village or gotra, clan exogamy, you must marry outside your own village or clan.
So they coexist. You marry in at one level, out at another. Why exogamy then? What's the function of marrying out?
Well, one influential theory from Levi Strauss talks about the exchange of women. The idea is that marrying outside your immediate group reduces hostility, builds alliances, creates connections, and ultimately helps form a larger, more integrated society. It's about building social networks.
That makes sense. Any other reasons?
Another perspective connects it to historical factors like food scarcity or female infanticide, which might have led to a shortage of women within a group. This could have made bride capture, literally capturing women from other groups, a necessity.
Wow.
Over time, even if the original reasons faded, the practice might have become ritualized. That's one explanation for why, in some Indian wedding traditions, the groom is still symbolically portrayed as a warrior arriving to take his bride.
Huh. And then there's maybe a simpler, more human reason.
Possibly. Edward Westermarck had a theory, sometimes jokingly called contempt due to familiarity. The idea is that people naturally seek partners outside their immediate familiar group simply out of curiosity, for novelty, maybe even for the status associated with marrying someone different.
Like the barber who knew everyone in his village too well, or kids being curious about the school across town.
Exactly. It really makes you wonder about our own lives, doesn't it? Does familiarity truly breed contempt in relationships, or does it breed comfort?
Yeah, that's a great question. I suspect it's a mix, depending on the person and the situation. That tension between novelty and security.
I think you're right. Our sources suggest that while novelty might initiate things, the comfort of the familiar often plays a huge role in long-term stability for many.
Okay, staying with the rules of who marries whom, let's talk about hypergamy and hypogamy. These are about marrying up or down the social ladder, right?
Exactly. Hypergamy, sometimes called Anulom marriage in an Indian context, is when a woman marries a man of higher social or caste status. Historically, this was often tolerated, sometimes even encouraged.
Like princesses marrying into more powerful royal families.
That's a classic example, forging political alliances, raising the family status. But hypergamy could also lead to really difficult situations. The Kulin Brahmins of Bengal from about the 12th to 19th centuries are a stark case.
What happened there?
Kulin Brahmin men were at the absolute top of the caste hierarchy. They could marry women from slightly lower ranked Brahmin groups, often receiving large dowries. But Kulin Brahmin women had a huge problem.
Because there was no one higher for them to marry.
Exactly. And they were forbidden from marrying down. That would be hypogamy. So this created a severe shortage of suitable Kulin grooms for Kulin women,
Leading to
leading to all sorts of issues. Sky-high dowry demands for the few available Kulin men, many Kulin women remaining unmarried, spinsterhood, widespread polygyny among Kulin men who could marry multiple lower status women, and tragically, women being seen as economic liabilities, which sometimes even contributed to female infanticide.
wow, a really problematic consequence of strict hierarchy and marriage rules.
Definitely. Now, in sharp contrast, you have hypogamy, or Pratilom marriage, where a woman marries a man of lower social status.
And this was strictly forbidden.
Very strictly prohibited in many hierarchical societies, and often still is. Our sources point out that violating this rule could, and sometimes still does, lead to incredibly violent consequences like so-called honor killings.
Why such an extreme reaction?
Because in these systems, women are often seen as the symbolic gateways or repositories of caste honor. Her choice of partner is perceived as directly impacting the entire family's status and purity. Marrying down is seen as polluting that honor.
This raises a really interesting point about how we read historical texts, doesn't it? When ancient writings like the Manusmriti forbid hypogamy so strongly.
Right. Does that mean it simply never happened? Or does the very strength of the prohibition suggest it was happening, and these were conservative reactions trying to stamp it out?
Laws against theft imply that theft occurs.
Exactly. It encourages us to think critically about whether these rules reflected reality or just an ideal pushed by certain groups. Were they descriptive or prescriptive?
Good point. Okay, so we have the forms, the general rules like endogamy, exogamy, and the status rules like hypergamy, hypogamy. How do societies guide the specific choices? There are different kinds of rules here too, right?
Yes. We can think of prescriptive rules, and preferential rules.
Okay, break those down.
Prescriptive rules are the thou shalt nots. They prohibit marriage with specific people. The most universal example is the incest taboo, though exactly who counts as too closely related varies a lot.
Got it. No marrying certain relatives.
Prescriptive rules are the thou shalts. They tell you the groups you must find a partner from. Things like endogamy, marry within your caste, or hypergamy, women must marry up or equal, fall here. They narrow the field.
Yeah, preferential rules. These sound more like suggestions.
Kind of. They indicate specific individuals or types of relationships that are considered ideal or preferred, even if not strictly mandatory. This is where things like cousin marriages come in, which are surprisingly common, especially in places like India.
Right, and there are different types of cousin marriage.
Yes, mainly two types. Cross-cousin marriage is marrying the child of your parents' opposite-sex sibling, so your father's sister's child or your mother's brother's child. This is widespread. Thousands of communities in India practice some form of it.
Okay, and the other type?
Parallel cousin marriage. That's marrying the child of your parents' same-sex sibling, your father's brother's child, or your mother's sister's child. This is much rarer globally, but practiced by some groups, including many Muslim communities and some South Indian Hindus.
Interesting distinctions. And then there are preferences based on previous marriages like levirate and sororate.
Exactly. Levirate is the practice where if a husband dies, his brother marries the widow.
Why would that be preferred?
It was particularly common in societies with high male mortality, often from warfare. It served several functions, providing social and economic support for the widow and her children, keeping property within the family line, and reestablishing those important kinship bonds that were broken by the death. It's quite pragmatic.
And sororate is the reverse.
Sort of. It's when a wife dies and her husband then marries her sister. This is often found in societies where a bride price was paid. The idea is that the husband's family paid for certain rights and services, and marrying the sister ensures the continuation of that arrangement.
Ah, like in the movie Unpacking. That was a central plot point.
Exactly. That movie brought the concept to popular attention, even though the sororate marriage didn't end up happening in the story. But it highlights the underlying logic. What does all this tell us about the value placed on individuals? It suggests marriage wasn't just about the two people, but about maintaining social and economic continuity between families.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered the forms, the rules, the preferences. Now let's talk about something often crucial to sealing the deal. Marriage payments, the bottom line financially speaking.
Right, and these generally fall into two main categories.
First, there's bride price, or sometimes called bride wealth. This is where the groom's family gives payment, cash, cattle, goods to the bride's family.
And this is incredibly common, isn't it? Especially in certain types of society.
Very common, especially in horticultural and pastoral societies where women's labor contribution is often very high. One survey found it in over half the societies studied globally.
So why bride price? What's the thinking behind it?
Well, several reasons. It can be seen as compensation to the bride's family for losing her labor. It can secure the husband's rights over the children born from the marriage children, often being valued as labor themselves.
Okay.
It also serves to demonstrate the groom's ability to provide resources. And it can strengthen ties between the two families, as they might pool resources to make the payment. Plus, some argue it can even stabilize the marriage, because if the wife leaves, her family might have to refund the bride price, which they'd be reluctant to do.
Makes sense from an economic and social stability perspective. Okay, what's the second type of payment?
That's dowry. This is where the bride's family pays the groom's family.
And this is much rarer.
Much rarer globally, yeah. Found in only about 6% of societies in that same survey, mostly concentrated in parts of Asia and Southeast Asia. Dowry can be a direct payment of cash or goods, or it can be indirect, like gifts given to the bride that become part of the marital household controlled by the groom's family.
And why dowry? What are the functions there?
Again, multiple factors. Sometimes it's seen as a religious obligation. Historically, it might have evolved from street hand, a form of female inheritance, essentially her share of the family wealth, but portable.
Okay.
It could also be tied to prestige, especially among higher castes wanting to attract desirable sons-in-law. Sometimes it might compensate if the bride had a disability. And particularly in societies where women's economic contribution is low and they depend heavily on their husband's family, dowry can be seen as a kind of insurance for the woman's future security.
So we have bride price, common where female labor is high, and dowry, rarer, often where it's low. Are there theories that try to explain this distribution?
Yes, a couple of main models. The labor value model, associated with Esther Boserup, suggests its simple correlation. High female labor contribution usually means bride price. Low female labor contribution and higher dependence on men often means dowry.
Straightforward enough. What's the other model?
A more complex one, sometimes called the female competition model or linked to reproductive strategy. It views these payments as tactics in the, reproductive game.
How so?
The idea is that bride price emerges when men are competing for scarce wives, maybe in polygynous societies, with unequal wealth, where wealthier men pay to attract more wives and maximize their reproductive success.
Okay, men compete, price goes up.
Right. Conversely, dowry emerges when women, or rather their families, are competing for scarce, desirable husbands, perhaps in highly stratified monogamous societies. Families pay dowry to help their daughters marry wealthy or high-status men, which is seen as enhancing her reproductive success and security.
So it flips the competition. How do these economic and, frankly, biological models square with our modern ideas about, love and romance in marriage?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? They certainly challenge the purely romantic view by highlighting these fundamental economic and strategic underpinnings that have shaped marriage for millennia. They show that while love and personal connection are obviously vital, especially today, marriage has always been at its core a social and economic institution designed to meet broader needs, labor, status, resources, continuity.
It forces us to see marriage as more than just a personal choice, but as something deeply embedded in the structure of society.
Exactly. So, stepping back, why do we even have marriage universally in some form or another? What are its absolute core functions, regardless of all this diversity?
Our sources often break it down using a handy acronym. BEES functions.
BEES. Okay, what does that stand for?
First, biological. Marriage provides a socially sanctioned framework for satisfying sexual needs and, crucially, for reproduction, ensuring the continuation of the society.
Makes sense.
Educational. Marriage typically creates the primary unit, the family responsible for the early education and enculturation of children, teaching them the norms and values of their society.
Okay, the second E.
Economic. Marriage is fundamental to the economic organization of society. It often involves a division of labor based on complementary skills historically, maybe the man as provider-protector, the woman managing the household, and it creates clear rights and obligations between the spouses regarding resources and labor. Social. Marriage serves vital social functions. It creates new kinship ties, uniting two previously separate families or lineages, and through reproduction, it produces new members of the kinship group and society.
So, biological, educational, economic, social.
Mhm.
BEES, that's a helpful way to remember the core functions.
And anthropologist Edmund Leach added more nuance, outlining 6 specific things marriage can, though doesn't always, achieve.
Right. Things like establishing legal parentage.
Yes, establishing the legal father of a woman's children and the legal mother of a man's child, giving spouses rights over each other's sexuality or property or labor.
And creating a joint fund for kids and that relationship of affinity love, attraction between the families too.
Exactly. It's a really holistic view that captures just how multi-layered marriage can be as an institution.
Okay, so that gives us a solid understanding of traditional functions.
Mhm.
But let's fast forward to right now to the 21st century. Things feel different. What's happening to marriage in what some sociologists call our liquid modern age?
It's definitely changing. We're seeing clear trends almost everywhere. Marriage rates are generally down, while cohabitation, just living together without being married, is way up.
And thinkers like Anthony Giddens have tried to explain this shift, right? With the idea of the pure relationship.
That's right. Giddens argues that in what he calls late modernity, several forces have converged. A greater emphasis on equality between partners, more focus on individual self-discovery, the impact of the sexual revolution, especially contraception separating sex from inevitable procreation, and of course, feminism transforming the personal sphere.
So what is a pure relationship in his view?
It's a relationship that exists basically solely to meet the emotional and sexual needs of the partners involved. It's entered into for its own sake.
And it lasts only as long
As both individuals feel they're getting enough satisfaction out of it to stay. The moment that mutual satisfaction fades, the relationship can and often does end without the heavy weight of traditional obligations or social stigma. It's built on equality, but also on contingency.
Is that a more authentic way to connect? Or just a more fragile one? It's a really different model.
It's definitely different. And it leads to related concepts he talks about, like plastic sexuality.
Meaning sex is more flexible, less tied down.
Yeah, greater sexual freedom, detached from lifelong commitment or the sole purpose of having children. It's more fluid, easier to get into, easier to get out of. And alongside that, confluent love.
Not romantic love, but
Confluent love is active, but it's also conditional, contingent. It's not the forever and always ideal of traditional romance. It lasts only as long as both partners are actively invested and feel it's working for them.
you can have Ulrich Beck, who talks about the negotiated family in a risk society, What's that perspective?
Beck argues that in our modern world, traditions hold less sway. We have more choices, but more choices mean we're constantly calculating risks, weighing the pros and cons of our actions. We become more risk averse.
And marriage, in this view, becomes a risk.
Potentially, yes. With high divorce rates, committing to marriage can seem like a big gamble, a risky investment. So people might invest more in themselves, their careers, their individual goals, rather than tying themselves completely to another person through traditional marriage.
So where do living together relationships fit in?
Beck sees them as negotiated families. They're created by these risk-aware individuals. They don't necessarily follow the old rules or norms. Instead, they function according to the wishes and agreements negotiated by the people in them.
But Beck also points out a paradox, right?
He does. Despite all this risk aversion and focus on the individual, people still seem to deeply desire and pursue the ideal of true love. Negotiated families, or cohabitation, offer a kind of flexible platform for this ongoing search. You can try it out, and if it doesn't feel like true love, the exit is easier than divorce.
And finally, Zygmunt Bauman's idea of liquid love. This sounds even more fluid.
It really does. Bauman uses this striking consumer metaphor. He compares finding partners today to online shopping.
Like browsing profiles on dating apps.
Exactly. We scroll through options, assessing people based on often superficial, measurable characteristics, assembling potential objects of love, almost like we'd assemble a shopping cart.
And the commitment level reflects that.
That's his argument. Just like we don't pledge lifelong devotion to something we buy online, we might enter relationships primarily for the satisfaction they offer us, but with a readiness to break it off if someone seemingly better or more satisfying comes along. The connection is liquid, not solid.
He talks about a core paradox here too, doesn't he?
Yes, the paradox of modern intimacy. We deeply crave connection and a safe haven, someone to rely on, especially in tough times, yet we simultaneously dread the commitment and potential constraints of being tied down. We want the safety, but we also want to keep our options open, keep our hands free.
And living relationships facilitate this liquid love.
Bauman suggests they do. They allow for this continuous searching and switching, trying to find that perfect fit without ever fully committing. It really makes you wonder, what are the long-term societal consequences if relationships become increasingly liquid?
It's a profound question. Which brings us back, after looking at all this history and theory and modern change, to a fundamental challenge for anyone studying this. Is marriage truly universal? And can we even define it in a way that covers all these variations?
It's incredibly difficult, surprisingly so.
Yeah.
As anthropologists found, to study something scientifically, you first need to define it. But the sheer diversity of practices related to pairing up and family makes finding a single, universally applicable definition of marriage almost impossible.
So many classic definitions focused on common elements.
That's like a union between a man and a woman involving cohabitation, recognized mutual sexual wants, maybe permanence, and the key function of legitimizing children born to the woman as offspring of both parents.
But as we've seen, there are exceptions to almost every part of that.
Immediately. Think about same-sex marriage, which challenges the man and woman part, or unique cultural practices like the musuo in China, where traditionally there was no formal marriage bond, just nighttime visits by men challenging cohabitation and permanence.
Or the Nayars in Kerala, with their complex system involving a brief ritual marriage followed by multiple non-exclusive relationships. That challenges permanence and exclusivity.
Right. And even the idea of legitimizing children gets complicated. What about polygynous or polyandrous marriages where parentage might be assigned differently, or modern concepts like polyamory or open marriages within a legal marriage?
And then there's the ultimate outlier, the one that seems to break all the rules, the newer ghost marriage.
Ah, yes, the ghost marriage. This is where a woman formally marries the spirit of a man who died without heirs.
So she marries a dead person.
Effectively, yes. Then, often, a living brother or kinsman of the deceased man will have children with the widow. But crucially, those children are considered the legal offspring of the dead man, the ghost husband.
That completely defies definitions based on living spouses, cohabitation, mutual sexual rights between the married pair, or even straightforward biological parentage determining legal status.
It really does. It shows just how flexible and culturally constructed the ideas around marriage, kinship, and legitimacy can be.
So, given all these exceptions and complexities, how do anthropologists actually study marriage globally? Do they just give up on defining it?
Not quite. They tend to rely on a very broad, general working definition for practical purposes, something along the lines of a culturally sanctioned union between two or more people that establishes certain rights and obligations between those people, between them and their children, and between them and their
That
in-laws.
sounds very general.
It has to be to try and capture as much diversity as possible. But even that definition, you could argue, struggles to neatly fit the newer ghost marriage.
So the big takeaway here
The
is,
big takeaway is pretty clear. There is no single universally applicable definition of marriage that fits every culture and every time period. Marriage is an incredibly adaptable, culturally specific institution. It reflects the vast ingenuity of human societies in organizing family life, managing resources, and creating social bonds in myriad ways.
wow, what a journey we've taken today. We've gone from the basic forms like monogamy and polygamy, uncovering some really surprising reasons behind them, like diet and demographics.
Yeah, and then diving into the complex rules about who you can and can't marry, endogamy, exogamy, hypergamy, hypogamy, and the economic exchanges like bride price and dowry that often accompany marriage.
We looked at the core functions marriage serves the BEES, and then explored how modern relationships are shifting, maybe toward this idea of liquid love, challenging the very definition of marriage itself.
And I think understanding all this variety really does broaden our perspective. It helps us see that our own cultural norms around marriage, whatever they are, represent just one possibility among countless ways humans have figured out how to pair up, form families, and structure society. Often these are very practical responses to specific challenges.
It definitely makes you think. After exploring how societies have defined and redefined marriage across all this time and space, it leaves a big question for you, the listener. What do you think is the most essential element of a marriage today? Is it love? Is it the legal status? Is it about having children, sharing resources, lifelong commitment? Or maybe something else entirely, something to ponder?